When I was a young man, I carried me pack, and I lived the free life of the rover. From the Murray's green basin to the dusty outback, I waltzed my Matilda all over. Then in 1915, my country said, son, it's time to stop rambling. There's work to be done. So they gave me a tin hat and they gave me a gun. And they sent me away to the war. And the band played Waltzing, Matilda, as our ship pulled away from the quay. And amid all the cheers, flag waving and tears, we sailed off to Gallipoli. Well, I remember that terrible day when our blood stained the sand and the water, and how in that hell that they called Suvla Bay, we were butchered like lambs at the slaughter. Johnny Turk, he was ready, he'd primed himself well. He rained us with bullets and showered us with shell, and in 5 minutes flat we were all blown to hell. Nearly blew us back home to Australia, but the band played Waltzing, Matilda, as we stopped to bury our slain. We burned ours and the Turks burned theirs. Then we started all over again. Those who were living just tried to survive in a mad world of blood, death and fire. And for 10 weary weeks I kept myself alive, while around me the corpses piled higher. Then a big Turkish shell knocked me arse overhead, and when I woke in me hospital bed, I saw what it had done, and I wished I were dead. I never knew there were worse things than dying, for I'll go no more waltzing, Matilda, all around the green bush, far and near, for to hump tent and pegs a man needs both legs. No more waltzing, Matilda, for me. They collected the crippled, the wounded, the maimed, and they shipped us back home to Australia. The armless, the legless, the blind, the insane, those proud, wounded heroes of Suvla. And as our ship pulled into Circular Quay, and I looked up the place where my legs used to be. I thanked Christ there was no one there waiting for me. To grieve and to mourn or to pity. And the band played Waltzing Matilda as they carried us down the gangway. But nobody cheered, they just stood there and stared. And they turned all their faces away. So now, every April, I sit on my porch and I watch the parade pass before me. I see my old comrades, how proudly they march, renewing their dreams of past glory. I see the old men, all tired, stiff and sore, the weary old heroes of a forgotten war. And the young people ask, what are they marching for? And I ask myself the same question. And the band played Waltzing Matilda, and the old men still answer the call. But year after year, the numbers grow fewer. Someday no one will march there at all. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me.
And their ghosts may be heard as you pass by the billabong.
Who'll come waltzing Matilda with me?
I had a dream while I was taking a nap earlier today that I went to a comedy show put on by Louis C.K. After the show, he was going through and shaking people's hands. When I got close, I asked him which hand he masturbated with, and I took that hand, shaking it vigorously with a maniacal laugh. That has nothing to do with anything, but I thought it might be interesting to share. It's the first dream I've remembered in more than a year. Bon heure locale, and welcome, mes amours, to 7 at 7, the least watched name in news. Remember to like, comment, follow, subscribe, whatever it is you can do to support the channel. It's through your help that I'm able to grow, and with hope, survive. Despite my continually waning health, another denial for social services, and the existential crisis that puts me under, I'm here, and I will be, until I finally, in the words of Hamlet, shuffle off this mortal coil. This week has been filled with stories of accusation, of threat, of the possibility of war amidst expanding proxy conflicts. Whether those stories be about actors discovering the fury of a woman scorned mixed with the dish that is best served cold, or stories of cultural divisions driven by mainstream media outlets who believe it is their place to control the narratives to best serve their short-term interests in hope of bringing about the utopian vision of their hearts, or just stories of the unfolding Middle Eastern proxy wars, which serve to define the lines on which the possibility of war or peace could rest. War has been on my mind, as in many nations, today is Remembrance Day. You may have noticed that today's introductory song was far more somber, far less in violation of YouTube's terms of service, and instead a recognition of that remembrance. Because what is important to remember is how those wars came to be. All those who gave their lives within those wars, and how the war forced every European nation into the 20th century. As we don't celebrate Remembrance Day in the States, it wasn't easy to find a red poppy to wear over my heart. But ever since the years which I spent Remembrance Day in Canada, as well as the 1 year I spent it in the UK, it has stuck with me. And with the events of this week, I think remembrance is far more important than ever. None of this is easy to discuss. From the growing rape and sexual assault accusations coming out of Hollywood, to the resignation of Lebanon's Prime Minister, Saad Hariri, to the Saudi purges of Wahhabist corruption within Saudi Arabia, and the sideline agreements made by Presidents Trump and Putin at the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference just yesterday. Every story is veiled with the narratives people wish to push forward and provide little in the way of facts. But there is one thing of which I am certain. We stand at the precipice of a world I suspect none of us are prepared for. The kind of world Otto von Bismarck warned Kaiser Wilhelm II about 20 years before the abdication of his throne in the aftermath of the First World War. It will be, as von Bismarck once similarly said, the Middle East today is a powder keg, and all its leaders are like men smoking in the arsenal. A single spark could set off an explosion that will consume us all. I cannot tell you when the explosion will occur, but I can tell you where. Some damn foolish thing in the Middle East will set us off. I don't often speak with such confidence as I do in that statement. However, the events of the last few months, and the last 2 weeks especially, have made the state of the chessboard of the rapidly changing Middle East remarkably apparent to me. And I hope, by going through the articles we're going to read today, that chessboard will become a little bit more apparent to you too. This isn't just another proxy war situation created by the corruption that exists within so many nations, nor is it the big lie of oil dependence, which so many base their understanding of the Middle East upon. It is rather the big political dissolution of big lies and the destruction of political swamps, who, through the efforts of those including President Trump, President Putin, and so many others, will pave the way to the future, most only dreamt of in the wake of the world wars which defined the 20th century. Before we begin, though, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time addressing some of those big lies. Take Russia and Putin, for example. It seems so easy for people to place the blame at the feet of Putin and Russia for their problems, despite the fact that their problems originated not with Russia, a nation which did not exist for most of the 20th century, but rather its corrupt communist replacement, the USSR. Russia does not wish to remain in a constant Cold War or ongoing proxy wars with the United States, for multiple reasons which we will go into in this show, but rather he has wanted an alliance with the United States for over a decade, despite the Bush and Obama administration's vilification of Russia. This fact is cemented by the continuing public deals taking place between Presidents Putin and Trump, agreements and deals which have accelerated the so-called War on Terror towards its first real victories in 16 years, both in Afghanistan and Syria. Another big lie worth addressing is the belief that the United States is allied with Saudi Arabia due to its dependency on oil, which couldn't be farther from the truth. It is rather the Saudi ownership of Aramco, the central oil company in Saudi Arabia, which depends on the US dollar to maintain its pricing power over oil. This, of course, comes as a result of the Bretton Woods Conference, which created the standards by which currency is exchanged and thereby international trade is managed, by fixing their exchange rates to the dollar and fixing the dollar to 35 ounces of gold bullion, as well as formed the International Monetary Fund and so-called World Bank. It fell short of creating the single global currency which John Maynard Keynes was so keen to create. But that same Bretton Woods system would collapse in 1971, when President Nixon severed the link between the dollar and gold, and Saudi Arabia had driven the prices of their oil up 500%. But most currencies have remained pegged to the dollar, and though negotiations made from the Ford administration to the Reagan administration, and through negotiations made from the Ford administration to the Reagan administration, the dollar was made and maintained as the currency in which oil was priced. Had we not done this, the possible bank rush on Fort Knox from international redemption of gold from their dollars would have completely bankrupted and destroyed the United States. We're not addicted to oil. We're addicted to financial hegemony, and Saudi Arabia is addicted to the power of the dollar and the sanctions they could implement through supporting U.S. politicians and influencing their decisions. And that brings us to our last big lie. Donald Trump is the worst thing that has ever happened to the United States. This one I can neither prove nor disprove, as the man has only been in office for less than a year. However, given the events of the last couple weeks, it's become clear to me that even if the man wants nothing more than to stabilize and protect his country, a country gripped by cultural divide and now under bi-weekly threats of nuclear annihilation by a tiny isolationist country hanging off of China and Russia. So let's, as Philly D puts it, jump right into it, shall we? As the nation becomes embroiled in accusation after accusation of sexual assault from the nothing burger of the leaked 2005 presidential recording of, then Donald Trump saying, "They'll let you do anything, even grab them by the pussy," to the accusations levied against Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, George Takei, and even Judge Roy Moore of Alabama, have completely taken over the news cycles, leaving the American public all but ignorant of the growing turmoil both in North Korea and the Middle East. Most of the allegations that have arisen are well outside the statutes of limitations, especially in California, which only provides 3 to 6 years for an allegation to be brought forth in order for criminal proceedings to be pursued in the case of sexual assault/rape. In the case of Judge Roy Moore, of course, we find an exception, as Alabama has no statute of limitations on sexual assault or statutory rape. From the Chicago Tribune, Roy Moore, Alabama voters will see through this charade of sexual misconduct claims. GOP Senate candidate Roy Moore spoke defiantly Saturday morning at a political gathering in Alabama that allegations amounted to fake news perpetrated by the Washington Post and political opponents engaged in a desperate attempt to stop his campaign. The Post reported earlier this week that 4 women said Moore had pursued sexual or romantic relations with them when they were teenagers and he was in his 30s. These campaign attacks are false and completely untrue, Moore told an audience of more than 100 supporters, who gave Moore several standing ovations during his speech at the Veterans Day breakfast. More than being completely untrue, they are deeply hurtful to me personally. He talked about his marriage, 4 children, and 5 granddaughters. I have the highest regard for the protection of young children, he said. To be attacked on allegations for sexual misconduct contradicts my entire career in law. I want to make it clear, I have not been guilty of sexual misconduct with anyone. These allegations occurred 4.5 weeks before the election. Why now? Moore said that he had been investigated more than any other person in this country. Sorry, just gotta move something right quick. To think that grown women would wait 40 years to come forward right before an election is absolutely unbelievable, he said, to a smattering of applause from the audience. He said that details would emerge soon about the claims against him. We expect the citizens of Alabama to see right through this charade. Moore arrived at the event Saturday morning with his wife, Kayla, amid boos from a dozen protesters gathering outside, including some chanting, "No more." The former Alabama Chief Justice refused to answer questions as he walked inside. "I was horrified," Lisa Weinhold, 56, who was protesting outside, said of the allegations. "I never liked Roy Moore that much, but when I heard about that, I was beyond horrified. There are a lot of smart people who have been on the other side for whom maybe this will be the final straw." "I'm not surprised," said Lisa Sharlock, 49. "It's usually the people who are screaming God and Jesus who are the ones with skeletons in their closet." Now that's just fucked up to say. That's racist in its own special way, isn't it, Lisa Sharlock? A half a dozen more supporters acknowledged Kaufman might have been telling the truth, but ultimately, they said they do not believe her and are standing confidently by Moore. "From what I've read, it seems like this 14-year-old girl, who is now 50-something, has a somewhat checkered past," said Johnny Creel, 56, an insurance broker wearing a makeup merit blah blah blah. "You have to judge a story like that on the credibility of the accuser, and I don't think it happens." Willie A. Casey, one of the few African Americans at the event, said the story is the hottest thing going in Birmingham, especially in the black community. But he said the allegations have not changed his position. "I believe in his biblical principles," said Casey, 70, comparing the United States to Sodom and Gomorrah. "I think in America we've gone so far out of the Bible, and someone needs to bring it back." Moore comments at his first public speaking engagement since the Post report followed a radio interview with Sean Hannity Friday, in which he addressed the charges of sexual misconduct. "These allegations are false and completely false and misleading," Moore told Hannity. He specifically denied the Post report that he had a sexual encounter with a 14-year-old girl, Leigh Korfman, in 1979. However, in the interview Friday, Moore did not rule out that he may have dated girls in their late teens when he was in his early 30s, which, of course, in Alabama isn't a crime, given the age of consent is 16, if not younger. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I believe it's 16. It might be like 15. So we're talking about a very, very unbalanced system where every state has different statutes of limitations and every state has different ages of consent. And in Alabama, there's a chance he dated someone that it might have sounded bad to date in another state, but there were no laws against dating in Alabama. Not to mention, Alabama has quite a few, what's the word I'm looking for, exception laws to statutory rape. Although, as you've noticed, no one's even mentioned the word statutory rape here. Some Republican women who attended the event Saturday said further allegations against Moore could change their feelings about him. But on the whole, they continued to back the judge, they said. "How come it has taken 40 years for this to come out?" said Julie Palmer as she sat down inside the library. "Why after all these years?" Annie Eubank, who helps lead a conservative group called Alabama Legislative Watchdogs, said the Washington Post was a part of a political conspiracy against Moore. "Y'all chose the month before to bring a hit piece thinking you could influence how Alabamians vote. And that's what makes Alabamans mad. Don't come down here and tell us how to vote," she said. Moore, who won the Republican nomination touting his belief in the supremacy of a Christian God over the Constitution, has invoked a defiant tone. His breakfast remarks occurred as a growing number of national party leaders called for Moore to leave the race before the December 12th election. Two former GOP presidential candidates, John McCain, who's a fucking rhino, he's not GOP, he's Republican in name only, and Mitt Romney, who might as well be a liberal, or at best a Mormon centrist, called for Moore to step down immediately, while Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Vice President Pence said Moore should step aside if the allegations prove true. On Friday, National Republican Senatorial Committee pulled out of a joint fundraising committee with Moore, depriving him of a key pathway to securing campaign dollars. Yet Saturday morning, his campaign sent out an appeal of support for Moore, who vowed he will not give up. The Obama-Clinton machine's liberal media lapdogs just launched the most vicious and nasty round of attacks against me I've ever faced. Also, najasty. What a great typo. He wrote in a fundraising appeal sent by the campaign under the name of his wife, Kayla. Sometimes I grow tired and weary from the strain of moving directly from slugging it out with GOP establishment to fighting off the powerful Obama-Clinton machine's constant stream of nasty and vicious attacks, he wrote. But our nation is at a crossroads now, both spiritually and politically. Rest assured, I will never give up the fight, he said. Republicans have been calling on Moore to drop out of the race, even though the GOP wouldn't be able to get another candidate on the ballot to run against Democrat Doug Jones, who was running a tight race against Moore even before the allegations surfaced. Moore's defenders in Alabama and elsewhere have been outspoken in his defense, questioning the Washington Post report and asking why women would remain silent for decades before emerging to tell their stories weeks before the special election to fill the seat vacated by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Trump who backed Moore in his recent primary against Senator Luther Strange, blamed the press, in which he described in a speech Thursday night as the opposition party. It's purely a part of the apparatus of the Democratic Party. Trump, traveling in Asia, has not spoke publicly about the allegations against Moore, but his press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, says, like most Americans, the president believes we cannot allow a mere allegation, in this case one from many years ago, to destroy a person's life. However, the president also believes that if these allegations are true, Judge Moore will do the right thing and step aside. Take note that some of these allegations are upwards of 40 years old and are only coming out now, 4.5 weeks before this election. Why not 4.5 years ago? Why not 40 years ago? It's not like sexual assault and statutory rape laws didn't exist then. Some might relate it to the Me Too campaign, the hashtag Me Too campaign, that started about a month ago. Blah, blah, blah. However, I see it the same way I see the Russia hoax story. It's entirely for the purpose of distracting from what really matters. The president is traveling the world, taking part in economic conferences, and striking deals with world leaders. But all anyone can seem to talk about right now is sexual assault. Slaves to their victimhood complexes, they see the opportunity to gain fame and support by coming forth with such things, joining in on a bandwagon of sexual assault accusations which can neither be prosecuted due to the statute of limitations or simply because those involved refuse to actually file charges against the person, instead turning to the court of public opinion to destroy one person for the sake of themselves and their ideology. But unfortunately, there are also those who think liberals should not be held accountable amidst these accusations, and that everyone should instead focus entirely on the Republicans who have been accused. From Medusa Magazine, a revolutionary feminist blog. We should believe women who accuse right-wingers of rape more than those who accuse liberals. Skipping past that intro paragraph, before I begin, I just want to state explicitly that no one supports the victims of sexual assault more than me. As a survivor of sexual assault, there's that beautiful virtue signaling. Myself and someone with a lot of friends who have either been raped, degraded, and or assaulted by men at some point in their life, I am well aware of the damning effect sexual assault can have on a woman's life. Rapists and sexual harassers deserve no sympathy and no due process. What? How do they deserve no due process? It's a crime, you mad woman. They deserve an eternity of suffering and torment, much like what their victims have to go through every day. No, they don't. Here's the thing. People get over shit. And if you don't allow yourself to get over shit, you're just going to turn into a fucking mad person. You're going to lose your mind. You're going to lose your ability to do anything because you're obsessed with your victimhood complex. However, this is not about rapists or victims of rape, but rather about how so-called sexual harassment is being used to devalue the work of longtime civil rights activists and pushers of progressive values. This sentence is amazing because the beginning and the end have nothing to do with each other. The only people pushing and devaluing the work of actual civil rights activists are these feminists and progressives themselves, who turn to the bigotry of low expectations and insult blacks, women, anyone, in order to, again, further their own agenda, their own ideology. But to continue, Hollywood is currently experiencing what is perhaps its most damning controversy yet, which has seen many, mostly liberal men, like Harvey Weinstein, Louis C.K., Ben Affleck, and Kevin Spacey, accused of sexual assault by men and women, some of whom allege that the assaults took place decades ago. Again, statutes of limitations. Now in California, statute of limitations is 3 to 6 years, depending on the severity of the crime. The most shocking of these accusations came yesterday, when a longtime LGBT activist and personal mentor of mine, George Takei, was accused of making unwanted advances toward an aspiring model in 1981, 36 years ago. These accusations have had irreversible effects on the accused. Kevin Spacey had several of his shows and movies canceled. George Takei had his role for an upcoming movie recast. Meanwhile, right-wing personalities like Donald Trump or Bill O'Reilly, who have been accused of sexual harassment, have faced almost no repercussion for their actions. Bullshit. Bill O'Reilly lost his goddamn job. Fuck you. Don't twist the facts just to... Good God, if only this woman didn't go under the pseudonym that matched the blog's name. In fact, one of them actually went on to become president of the United States. Yeah, that's because the accusation that his wife made back in, like, 1993, that Donald Trump had raped her, was later recanted on the record. There were multiple lawsuits, and it was proven that he did no such thing. He may have made her a little bit uncomfortable, but he did nothing illegal. But apparently, making women uncomfortable is enough to be a crime in the court of public opinion. Regardless of whether any of these men are... Oh, God, this is the line that really pissed me off about this article. Regardless of whether any of these men are guilty of the crimes they have been accused of or not, there's one thing for sure. The ones who hold left-wing values have earned the right to make at least one mistake in their lives. Yes. We're talking about people who have 3, 4, excuse me. Sometimes upwards of 10 men and women accusing them of sexual assault, sexual harassment, and so much more. But, you know, it's okay if they do it because they're liberals. They're progressives. They're allowed to, but it gets worse, don't worry. George Takei has helped millions of LGBT children around the globe come out and be comfortable in their sexuality. No, he didn't. He came out 10 years ago. He had nothing to fucking do with the large coming out movement in the 70s and 80s. He stayed quiet. He was very late to the party and does not deserve that honor. If you want to talk about people who actually helped people come out of the closet, how about you talk about Freddie Mercury? Seeing as he actually did that. But no, you're just going to twist the facts in order to make it fit your agenda, right? Christ. Harvey Weinstein has donated funds to many Democratic candidates and grassroots movements that has helped us secure political power. Oh, so that gives him a grant. So he's just allowed to rape whoever he wants now, right? He's given money to the Democratic Party, so now he's allowed to fuck and rape anyone. And you'll see how bad this gets. Who cares if these men have made 1 or 2 mistakes in their lives? What's important is they've realized their mistakes and are willing to learn from them, which is more than how the fuck would you know? Which is more than I can say for Trump and his fellow GOP rapists. This is how divided we've become as a country. We see one political party as the party of rape. And I see that, as a men's rights activist, as utterly disturbing and quite a sign of the division our country is in, despite the fact many people are arguing that the problems only exist at the far fringes. No. When you take feminism versus the sheer amount of abuse that men take on a regular basis that no one pays attention to. For example, the military school I went to, which was essentially a goddamn sex ring, child abuse factory. No one cared about those boys. No lawsuit came forth that was able to defend and support those boys who had to be taken out by force by the state troopers back in 2005. And there are millions of schools, or I say millions, there are dozens of schools like this across the country. Abuse factories that fuck little boys. And it's absolutely fucking horrible. And yet, apparently we should sympathize with the victims of these liberal men, but we should not devalue the work and legacies of their rapists. To focus too much on the accusation brings to light these men's political ideologies, which wreaks havoc for us. That's not how you spell it, bitch. It would be hypocritical of us to keep criticizing Trump and rape culture when so many men among us have been accused of sexual assault. If more liberal personalities get accused of sexual assault between now and 2020, Trump is going to win a second term. Yeah. This has nothing to do with protecting women and everything to do with protecting your social hegemony. I don't know about you, and here's the line that drove me fucking insane, but I would rather live in a world where liberals hold political power and a few women get raped than one in which conservatives hold power and women still get raped. It makes me so sick to read that aloud. The author, who remains pseudonymous behind the name of her blog, thinks that people on the left have earned the right to get away with rape because they've fought for civil rights or social justice or donated to a Democratic candidate. And I cannot disagree more. While she would rather live in a world where liberals hold power and a few women get raped, I would much rather live in a world where due process is followed, and rapists, regardless of politics or gender, are held to account by the justice system. I'd rather live in a world where we don't spend all of our energy trying to manipulate the court of public opinion for the sake of ruining someone else's life without ever investigating the situation in full and allowing justice to be served. After all, justice is not served just because a person gets their way. Justice is served when all the facts have been investigated and laid out, without bias, in order for judgment to be passed. If any of these accusations are true, and within the statute of limitations, then I would gladly wait to see these cases be taken to court. However, with so few legal actions being taken, despite the overwhelming number of accusations which have come out in the last month alone, I probably shouldn't hold my breath. Speaking of rape, Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has made some remarkable actions recently, which, on their surface, might make an individual uncomfortable, but after closer inspection, have actually impressed me greatly. King Mohammed bin Salman has taken two extremely large actions across the last 2 weeks, which have destabilized the Middle East, especially Lebanon and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia itself. After numerous threats on the life of the Prime Minister Saeed Hariri of Lebanon drove him to request help from the King from Saudi Arabia, King Salman forced him to resign as Prime Minister of Lebanon only a day after his unceremonious trip to the Saudi Kingdom. How Saudi Arabia turned on Lebanon's Hariri. From Reuters. From the moment Saad al-Hariri's plane touched down in Saudi Arabia on Friday, November 3rd, he was in for a surprise. There was no lineup of Saudi princes or ministry officials, as would typically greet a prime minister or an official on a visit to King Salman. Senior source close to Hariri and top Lebanese political and security officials said. His phone was confiscated, and the next day he was forced to resign as prime minister in a statement broadcast by Saudi-owned TV channels. The move thrust Lebanon back into the forefront of a struggle that is reshaping the Middle East between the conservative Sunni monarchy of Saudi Arabia and the Shiite revolutionary Iran. Their rivalry has fueled conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, where they back opposing sides, and now risks destabilizing Lebanon, where Saudi has long tried to weaken the Iran-backed Hezbollah group, Lebanon's main political power and part of the ruling coalition. Sources close to Hariri say Saudi Arabia has concluded that the Prime Minister, a longtime Saudi ally and son of the late Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, who was assassinated in 2005, had to go because he was unwilling to confront Hezbollah. Multiple Lebanese sources say Riyadh hopes to replace Saad Hariri with his older brother, Baha Hariri, as Lebanon's top Sunni politician. Baha is believed to be in Saudi Arabia, and members of the Hariri family have been asked to travel there to pledge allegiance to him, but have refused, sources say. When Hariri's plane landed in Riyadh, he got the message immediately that something was wrong, a Hariri source told Reuters. There was no one waiting for him. Saudi Arabia has dismissed suggestions it forced Hariri to resign and says he is a free man. Saudi officials could not immediately be reached for comment on the circumstances of his arrival, whether his phone had been taken, and whether the kingdom was planning to replace him with his brother. Hariri has given no public remarks since he resigned, and no indication of when he might return to Lebanon. Hariri was summoned to the kingdom to meet the Saudi King Salman in a phone call on Thursday night, November 2nd. Before departing, he told his officials they would resume their discussions on Monday. He told his media team that he would see them at the weekend in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, where he was due to meet Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on the sidelines of the World Youth Forum. Hariri went to his Riyadh home. His family made their fortune in Saudi Arabia and have long had properties there. The source close to Hariri said the Lebanese leader received a call from the Saudi protocol official on Saturday morning, who asked him to attend a meeting with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He waited about 4 hours before being presented with his resignation speech to read on television, the source said. From the moment he arrived, the Saudis showed no respect for the man, another senior Lebanese political source said. Hariri frequently visits Saudi Arabia. On a trip just a few days earlier, Prince Mohammed bin Salman had arranged for him to see senior intelligence officials and Gulf Affairs Minister Thamar al-Sabhan, the Saudi point man on Lebanon. Hariri came back from that trip to Beirut relaxed and pleased, sources in his entourage said. He posted a selfie with Sabhan, both of them smiling. He told aides that he had heard encouraging statements from the Crown Prince, including a promise to revive a Saudi aid package for the Lebanese army. The Hariri sources believed he had convinced Saudi officials of the need to maintain an entente with Hezbollah for the sake of Lebanon's stability. Hezbollah has a heavily armed fighting force, in addition to seats in parliament and government. The Saudi-backed efforts to weaken the group in Lebanon a decade ago led to Sunni Shiite clashes and a Hezbollah takeover of Beirut. What happened in those meetings, I believe, is that Hariri revealed his position on how to deal with Hezbollah in Lebanon. The confrontation would destabilize the country. I think they didn't like what they heard, said one of the sources, who was briefed on the meetings. The source said Hariri told Sabhan not to hold us responsible for something that is beyond my control or that of Lebanon, but Hariri underestimated the Saudi position on Hezbollah, the source said. For Saudis, it is an existential battle. It is black and white. We in Lebanon are used to gray, the source said. Sabhan could not be immediately reached for comment. Hariri's resignation speech shocked the team. Lebanese President Michael Aoun, a Hezbollah ally, told ambassadors to Lebanon that Saudi Arabia had kidnapped Hariri, a senior Lebanese official said. On Friday, France said it wanted Hariri to have all his freedom of movement. In his speech, Hariri said he feared assassination and accused Iran and Hezbollah of sowing strife in the region. He said that the Arab world would cut off the hands that wickedly extend to it, language which one source close to him said was not typical of the Lebanese leader. Hariri's resignation came as more than 200 people, including 11 Saudi princes, current and former ministers and tycoons, were arrested in an anti-corruption purge in Saudi Arabia. But the Saudi king was not finished with his shocking displays of totalitarianism, which are technically his right as the king of Saudi Arabia. Amid the rumors floating that King Salman will be abdicating his throne to his son, the Saudi Arabian king announced Saturday that he was assembling an anti-corruption panel headed by his son, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, while simultaneously reporting the arrest of nearly 24 royal family members, cabinet ministers, and prominent businessmen, all with ties to Wahhabism. But these aren't the first figures which have been taken out of power in Saudi Arabia. In September, a similar purge of the government targeted 30 senior Wahhabist clerics and intellectuals, replacing them with clerics who promote tolerance for other religions, including Judaism and Christianity. He has even taken away the power of the religious police to make arrests, instead using his own military police to those ends. From Front Page Mag, Saudi Purges and a Duty to Act. Originally published by the Jerusalem Post. For 70 years, Saudi... by the way, this is by Carolyn Glick. However, she works directly with David Horowitz. And David Horowitz is one of the few Jews in the world I'm actually a fan of. Because he doesn't put up with bullshit. He is a very straightforward... He's a really straight shooter. I really do enjoy his works. For 70 years, Saudi Arabia has served as the largest and most significant incubator of Sunni jihad. Its Wahhabist Islamic establishment funded radical mosques throughout the world. Saudi princes have supported radical Islamic clerics who have indoctrinated their followers to pursue jihad against the non-Islamic world. Saudi money stands behind most of the radical Islamic groups in the non-Islamic world that have in turn financed terrorist groups like Hamas and Al-Qaeda, and have insulated radical Islam from scrutiny by Western governments and academics. Indeed, Saudi money stands behind the silence of critics of jihadist Islam in universities throughout the Western world. As Michael Bard documented in his 2011 book, The Arab Lobby, any pro-Israel forces in Washington, D.C. have developed pales in comparison to the power of Arab forces, led by the Saudi government. The Saudi government's spending on lobbyists in Washington far outstrips that of any other nation. According to the Justice Department disclosures from earlier this year, since 2015, Saudi Arabia has vastly increased its spending on influence peddling. According to a report by The Intercept, since 2015, the kingdom has expanded the number of foreign assets on retainer to 145, up from 25 registered assets during the previous 2-year period. Saudi lobbyists shielded the kingdom from serious criticism after 15 of the 19 September 11th hijackers were shown to be Saudi nationals. They blocked a reconsideration of the U.S.'s strategic alliance with Saudi Arabia after the attacks and in subsequent years, even as it was revealed that Princess Haifa, wife of Prince Bandar, the Saudi ambassador to Washington at the time of the September 11th attacks, had financially supported 2 of the hijackers in the months that preceded the attacks. The U.S. position on Saudi Arabia cooled demonstrably during the Obama administration. The cooling was not due to a newfound concern over Saudi financial support for radical Islam in the U.S. To the contrary, the Obama administration was friendlier to Islamists than any previous administration. Consider the Obama administration's placement of Muslim Brotherhood supporters in key positions in the federal government. For instance, in 2010, then Secretary for Homeland Security Janet Napolitano appointed Mohammed Elibieri to the department's Homeland Security Advisory Board. Elibieri had a long, open record of support both for the Muslim Brotherhood and for the Iranian regime. In his position, he was instrumental in purging discussion of Islam and jihad from instruction materials used by the U.S. military, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies. The Obama administration's cold relations with the Saudi regime owed to its pronounced desire to ditch the U.S.'s traditional alliance with the Saudis, the Egyptians and other U.S. traditional Sunni allies in favor of an alliance with the Iranian regime. But during that same period, the Muslim Brotherhood's close ties to the Iranian regime became increasingly obvious. Among other indicators, Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood-affiliated president Mohamed Morsi hosted Iranian leaders in Cairo and was poised to renew Egypt's diplomatic ties with Iran before he was overthrown by the military in July 2013. Morsi permitted Iranian warships to traverse the Suez Canal for the first time in decades. Saudi Arabia joined Egypt and the United Arab Emirates in designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group in 2014. It is also during that period that Saudis began warming their attitude toward Israel. Though Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and due to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's leading role in opposing Iran's nuclear program and its rising power in the Middle East, the Saudis began changing their positions on Israel. Netanyahu's longtime foreign policy advisor, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs President Dr. Dore Gold, who authored the 2003 bestseller Hatred Kingdom, How Saudi Arabia Supports the New Global Terrorism, which exposed Saudi Arabia's role in promoting jihadist Islam, spearheaded a process of developing Israel's security and diplomatic ties with Riyadh. Those ties, which are based on a shared opposition to Iranians' regional empowerment, led to the surprising emergence of a working alliance between Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE with Israel during Israel's 2014 war with Hamas, the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. It is in the context of Saudi Arabia's reassessment of its interests and realignment of strategic posture in recent years that the dramatic events of the last few days in the kingdom must be seen. Saturday's sudden announcement that the new anti-corruption panel, headed by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and the near simultaneous announcement of the arrest of more than 24 royal family members, cabinet ministers, and businessmen is predominantly being presented as a power seizure by the Crown Prince. Amid widespread rumors that King Salman will soon abdicate his throne to his son, it is reasonable for the 32-year-old Crown Prince to work to neutralize all power centers that could threaten his ascension to the throne. It's something, I feel it's something important to add here. So they don't have the same kind of, okay, so in England, it's the firstborn son, right? The firstborn son is who gets to take the throne after the father dies, or after the monarch dies. It's not the same in Saudi Arabia. If Mohammed bin Salman, the King Mohammed bin Salman, were to die tomorrow, well, okay, if he were to die 2 weeks ago, before the purges began, it would not have been the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman who would have ascended to the throne, but rather one of King Salman's brothers who would have made that ascension. I can't remember the exact way, what they exactly call it, but it's essentially the, it's a matter of the, it's the brothers and then the sons. It's the brothers and then the sons. But there's clearly also something strategically more significant going on. While many of the officials arrested over the weekend threaten Mohammed's power, they aren't the only ones that has been purged. In September, Mohammed arrested some 30 senior Wahhabist clerics and intellectuals. And Saturday's arrest of the prince's cabinet ministers and business leaders was followed up by further arrests of senior Wahhabist clerics. At the same time, Mohammed had been promoting clerics who espoused tolerance for other religions, including Judaism and Christianity. He had removed the Saudi religious police's power to conduct arrests, and he has taken seemingly credible steps to finally lift the kingdom-wide prohibition on women driving. At the same time, Mohammed has escalated the kingdom's operations against Iran's proxies in Yemen. And of course, on Saturday, he staged the resignation of Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri amid Hariri's allegations that Hezbollah and Iran were plotting his murder, much as they stood behind the 2005 assassination of his father, Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. There can be little doubt that there was coordination between the Saudi regime and the Trump administration regarding Saturday's actions. the timing of the administration's release last week of most of the U.S. Special Forces, the files U.S. Special Forces seized during their 2011 raid of al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, was likely not a coincidence. The files, which the Obama administration refused to release, made clear that Obama's two chief pretensions, that al-Qaeda was a spent force by the time U.S. forces killed bin Laden, and that Iran was interested in moderating its behavior, were both untrue. The documents showed that al-Qaeda's operations remained a significant worldwide threat to U.S. interests. And perhaps more significantly, they showed that Iran was al-Qaeda's chief state sponsor. Much of al-Qaeda's leadership, including bin Laden's sons, operated from Iran. The notion, touted by Obama and his administration, that Shiite Iranians and Sunni terrorists from al-Qaeda and other groups were incapable of cooperating was demonstrated to be an utter fiction by the documents. Their publication now, as Saudi Arabia takes more determined steps to slash its support for radical Islamists and separate itself from Wahhabist Islam, draws a clear distinction between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Given Saudi Arabia's record and the kingdom's 70-year alliance with Wahhabist clerics, it is hard to know whether Muhammad's move signals an irrevocable breach between the House of Saud and the Wahhabists, but the direction is clear. With Hariri's removal from Lebanon, the lines between the forces of jihad and terrorism led by Iran and the forces that opposed them are clearer than ever before, and the necessity of acting against the former and helping the latter has similarly never been more obvious. Now, that last statement is one of the destabilization and possibility of civil war that they're under right now. They are also doing all in their power to actually reform. I know Sargon keeps talking about ISIS being the Islamic Reformation, but I completely disagree. I believe that through the influence of Donald Trump, the Saudi family, the House of Saud, is actually working to disassemble Wahhabism, as it has completely infected and taken over their country, and even taken power away from the House of Saud itself, even if they are the crowned king and princes. But it's also why I felt it so important in my introduction to bring up that quote by Otto von Bismarck. Because even if, in the most optimistic light, this is the beginning of the end for Saudi Wahhabism, this also leaves Saudi Arabia vulnerable. And a vulnerable Saudi Arabia means a violently offensive Iran. Every proxy war of the last 40 years in the Middle East has rested on the fact that Sunnis and Shiites are completely willing to kill each other for their profit, and has only further radicalized the region. And if one side is attempting to dissolve its involvement with that radicalization, we will only be left with the other radicals, which include Hezbollah and al-Houthi, as well as a large percentage of al-Qaeda. While these groups are just as violent as their Sunni terrorist counterparts, the relationship between Iran and Russia serves as a diplomatic chess piece, which can be moved into play by Putin should Iran continue promoting terrorism and threatening nuclear proliferation. These actions, taken by Saudi Arabia, come so soon after President Trump's recent communications with King Salman, as well as the Trump administration's releasing of the files obtained during the 2000 raid of Osama bin Laden's compound, showing that Saudi Arabia, with the abdication of the throne from father to son, will serve as a new era of Saudi politics and reform. But despite Russia's thumb on Iran, I doubt Russia will remain friends with Iran for long, if Iran continues funding terrorism in the Middle East and worldwide. After all, ever since President Trump's election, he has maintained very positive interactions with President Putin, discussing and negotiating how to best stem the flow of terrorism from the Middle East and put an end to the continuing proxy wars between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Early today, at the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, or APEC, the two met multiple times and came to an agreement for defeating the Islamic State in Syria. From the office of the President of Russia, better known as the Kremlin in the same way that the office of the President of the United States is often called the White House. Statement by the Presidents of the Russian Federation and the United States of America, November 11th, 2017. President Trump and President Putin today, meeting on the margins of the APEC conference in Da Nang, Vietnam, confirmed their determination to defeat ISIS in Syria. They expressed their satisfaction with successful U.S.-Russia enhanced deconfliction efforts between U.S. and Russian military professionals that have dramatically accelerated ISIS's losses on the battlefield in recent months. The presidents agreed to maintain open military channels of communication between military professionals to help ensure the safety of both U.S. and Russian forces and deconfliction of partnered forces engaged in the fight against ISIS. They confirmed these efforts will be continued until the final defeat of ISIS is achieved. The presidents agreed there is no military solution for the conflict in Syria. If there's one line you take away from this article, that's the line. They confirmed that the ultimate political goal to the conflict must be forged through the Geneva process, pursuant to UNSCR 2254. They also took note of President Assad's recent commitment to the Geneva process and constitutional reform and elections as called for under UNSCR 2254. The two presidents affirmed that these steps must include full implementation of UNSCR 2254, including constitutional reform and free and fair elections under UN supervision, held to the highest international standards of transparency, with all Syrians, including members of the diaspora, eligible to participate. The presidents affirmed their commitment to Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, territorial integrity, and non-sectarian character, as defined, blah, 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 and urged all Syrian parties to participate actively in the Geneva political process and to support efforts to ensure its success. Finally, President Trump and President Putin confirmed the importance of de-escalation areas as an interim step to reduce violence in Syria, enforce ceasefire agreements, facilitate unhindered humanitarian access, and set the conditions for the ultimate political solution to the conflicts. Kind of sounds like a final solution, but thankfully, they did say there's no military solution to the conflict. Oh, shit. No, back, bastard. They reviewed progress on the ceasefire in southwest Syria that was finalized the last time the two presidents met in Hamburg, Germany on July 7th, 2017. The two presidents today welcomed the Memorandum of Principles concluded in the Amman, Jordan, on November 8th, 2017, between the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, the Russian Federation, and the United States of America. This memorandum reinforces the success of the ceasefire initiative to include reduction and ultimate elimination of the foreign forces and foreign fighters from the area to ensure a more sustainable peace. Monitoring the ceasefire arrangement will continue to take place through the Amman Monitoring Center, with participation by expert teams from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, the Russian Federation, and the United States. The two presidents discussed the ongoing need to reduce human suffering in Syria and called on all UN member states to increase their contributions to address these humanitarian needs over the coming months. This is, of course, an enormous step, but the American mainstream media will have absolutely none of it, again attempting to suggest that Russia has hacked our elections in 2016, when the only thing they have done included buying small advertisements on Facebook and monitoring the election through its spy network in the SVR, or Foreign Intelligence Service, though Russia has struck back, making nearly identical accusations as CNN, in stating that the United States intelligence community is interfering with the upcoming Russian elections, a statement I am far more likely to believe given the counterintelligence powerhouse that is the FSB and the recent addition to the candidates in Russia, a woman named Yekaterina Gordon, a former Playboy model, singer-songwriter, and journalist who seems to have the support of every media outlet that is currently funded by the CIA. It is, of course, important to note that our Central Intelligence Agency is essentially a rogue state of its own, controlled by corrupt directors as well as corrupt intelligence committee politicians. And while they are our responsibility as a nation, they are not currently working in the interests of the United States. Much like the former KGB, they have been able to build an entire private military and intelligence force, and will prove just as much a political problem for Russia in their alliance with the United States, as former KGB officials in the European Eastern Bloc nations have proven for the United States in the past. However, with the very globalist-oriented Xi Jinping in China making plays in every nation he can, it serves Russia very well to be allied with the United States as well as Japan, especially in light of the upcoming petro-yuan futures contracts. And of course, so much more is happening, including people becoming aware of the impact of the petro-yuan and what effects it could have in the long term on all oil trades, given China's position as the #1 importer of oil. So this week, I've laid out for you some of the major players in the rapidly destabilizing political atmosphere around the world. But there is so much more to be found. North Korea's continuing threats leave it not only considered a threat by the United States, but China and Russia as well, given their continued nuclear testing, as neither China nor Russia puts up with acts of aggression upon its borders. If Saudi Arabia continues dissolving their support for terrorists, as well as fulfills the petro-yuan contracts, we will be seeing enormous swings of control. And if the United States returns to the Korean War, a war which never actually ended, merely stalled out in a ceasefire, we will see China's true intentions, especially through their relationships with North Korea, Pakistan, and of course, Iran. But that is going to have to wait until next week, until after I've appealed the Medicaid decision, which has left me in a depressive spiral and unable to pursue medical assistance, and until we find out more about President Trump's continuing conferences and deals. If you've enjoyed the show, though, please like, follow, subscribe, comment, or, consider contributing to me on Patreon. And until when, happy Veterans Day, happy Remembrance Day. Bon voyage et bonne chance.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead short days ago. We lived the dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields, in Flanders fields, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up your quarrel with the foe,
how do you do, young Willie McBride? Do you mind if I sit here down by your graveside and rest for a while in the warm summer sun? I've been walking all day and I'm nearly done, and I see by your gravestone you were only 19 when you joined the great falling in 1916. Well, I hope you died quick, and I hope you died clean. Oh, Willie McBride, was it slow and obscene? Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fife lowly? Did they sound the death march as they lowered you down? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest? And did you leave a wife or a sweetheart behind? In some loyal heart is your memory enshrined. And though you died back in 1916, to that loyal heart you're forever 19. Or are you a stranger without even a name, forever enshrined behind some old glass pane? In an old photograph, torn, tattered and stained, and faded to yellow in a brown leather frame. Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fife lowly? Did they sound the death march as they lowered you down? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest? The sun shining down on these green fields of France. The warm wind blows gently and the red poppies dance. The trenches have vanished long under the plow. No gas, no barbed wire, no guns firing now. But here in this graveyard that's still no man's land, the countless white crosses in mute witness stand to man's blind indifference to his fellow man. And a whole generation were butchered and damned. Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the pipe lowly? Did they sound the death march as they lowered you down? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest? And I can't help but wonder, no Willie McBride, do all those who lie here know why they died? Did you really believe them when they told you the cause? Did you really believe that this war would end wars? Well, the suffering, the sorrow, the glory, the shame, the killing and dying, it was all done in vain. Oh, Willie McBride, it all happened again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fife lowly? Did they sound the death march as they lowered you down? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest?